All right, guys, we are back. And today, what we're going to focus on is IPSEC, Internet Protocol Security. Guys, we are on the topic of Comptia Security Plus. So it only makes sense to learn the protocols that would enable us to basically authenticate and encrypt the communication channels that we're using. Cybersecurity. What is the essence of cybersecurity? It goes to our framework of the CIA: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And I have a quick little, how do I say this, scenario for you. I want you guys to go ahead and pretend you have a job interview. You're in the middle of a job interview, and your potential boss, okay, the hiring manager, goes ahead and they ask you, would you be able to tell us about IPSEC? Okay. And honestly, guys, this is a great way to go ahead and just test yourself. Okay, because we're going to go ahead and talk about that topic, and maybe there's some things that you already know about the topic, or maybe there's some things that you don't know about the topic. But I honestly want you guys to go through this scenario. Okay, your potential boss, okay, you're in the middle of an interview and they ask you, can you go ahead and tell us about IPsec? Okay, and pause this video, come back to it whenever you're ready, or come back to it after you've gone ahead and given your answer. And if you're back already, great. If I highly recommend you do the exercise, that way you go ahead and start going through the wheels in your brain so you can go ahead and grease the groove, so to speak. So nonetheless, we have two alternatives, guys. I'm going to give you two answers. Two, think of it as alternative realities. In one world, you're sitting in that desk, you're sitting across the desk, you're sitting in your chair, and they ask you, what is IPsec? And in that one alternative reality, you say, oh, IPsec is a secure communication channel which you would go ahead and use to transfer data. Okay, let's just assume, right, that that's what you would say, or that's something that you had along the lines of saying. Okay, now I'm going to present another reality. And in this reality, they ask you, can you go ahead and tell us about IPsec? And you say, oh, certainly. IPsec is a way to go ahead and have secure communication. With regards to the OSI model, you're basically dealing with layer three. It's more prevalent in what would be VPN. VPN stands for virtual private network. I did mention layer three of the OSI model. So that basically goes ahead and deals with what would be IP addresses, which is a little different from TLS, which actually is another communication channel, but that deals more so with the fourth layer of the OSI model. Some people even argue that it would be the seventh layer, the application, because you're dealing with the web browser. Now, this communication channel, you can have it when it comes to server to server, from host to server, or potentially from host to host. So there's different ways of communicating. In addition, IPsec is actually a suite of protocols. So it's actually a conglomeration of three other protocols that have to do with authentication header, encapsulating security payload, and in addition to IKE, which is internet key. Internet key. I forget what it's skipping me, but it's internet key. Um, yeah, I forget what it is, but nonetheless, I do know that IPsec actually has three protocols within it. And within those protocols, the authentication header actually goes ahead and deals with two different modes. So you can have a transport mode, or you can have a tunnel mode. And within the transport mode, you basically go ahead and it authenticates. So the authentication header, actually, funny fact, it doesn't do any encrypting. What it does is it authenticates. So it actually uses, it's basically a hash to go ahead and verify that the communication which it's sent from is verified. In addition, you have tunnel mode. Tunnel mode, you would actually go ahead and verify, authenticate the complete message. And in addition, you go ahead and add a new IP header, which sometimes can be a trouble with network address translation. Look at the difference, guys. Okay, look at the major difference. Did I mess up? Yeah, I did. I did mess up. I messed up on basically on one of the protocols that is composed of IPsec. But look at the major difference between the first reality and the second reality. In the first reality, I gave an answer that somebody would basically go ahead and completely say right off the bat, and that would be sufficient. And technically, they would be correct. But in the second reality, okay, in the second reality, I took time, even though I messed up, I took time to try to explain it. I took time to give details. I gave time to go ahead and demonstrate that, hey, I really studied this protocol. I went above and beyond. Even though I messed up one of the protocols, at least I attempted to go ahead and answer it at a higher level. Okay, guys. So today, what we're going to focus on is IPsec, Internet Protocol Security, and I really want you guys to start thinking about this. Put yourself in that situation. Start to visualize. Hey, what would they ask me about this? Hey, if somebody asked me this, what would my answer be? Like, go ahead, practice in the mirror, go ahead and think about it, answer it, and that way you, with practice and more practice, you won't goof up like me. Okay, but nonetheless, guys, let's go ahead and continue. So internet protocol security, what exactly is it? Okay, so I like to do the who, what, when, where, why. So we're doing who, IPsec. What is it? It is actually a protocol suite, and we're in this video, we're going to go ahead and get into the details. When, okay, this is when data is in transit. Remember the three types of data, so to speak. Okay, you have data at rest, you have data in transit, and then you have data at work. Okay, so when you're actually working on a file, so to speak, that would be data at work. Okay. Where is this happening? This is happening on the layer 3 of the OSI model. Guys, I always like to refer back to the OSI model. I'm not going to stop. This is something that you guys can expect if you're watching these videos, because it does provide a framework and it does give you a bigger picture of exactly where you are operating, so to speak. And why are we using Internet Protocol Security? Okay, easy. We want to go ahead and secure our communications. Okay, as you guys can see here, we have the OSI model. I did allude to this earlier before. Remember, layer 3 is the network. This here is where we're dealing with IP addresses. We're dealing with the logical addresses. A TLS, okay, that would be more so with TCP or UDP. Okay, and remember that is basically TCP and UDP is a protocol in how exactly the message is sent. Okay, three-way handshake, and then shoot and forget, things of that nature. And I did mention that TLS is basically from, people would argue, from layer 4 to 7, because a web browser is technically considered an application. But nonetheless, let's continue. This is the side note I already mentioned. So remember, there's three main technologies. These are something that you should go ahead and be familiar with. VPN, I made a video on that not too long ago. TLS, transport layer security. This is maybe a potential future video that we can go ahead and do. And then IPsec, which is the video we are literally going through right now. And all of these three technologies, guys, this is dealing with data in transit. We are transferring data and we want to go ahead and transfer data securely. Okay, so let's go ahead and get to IPsec. So this right here is what you would typically find with regards to a technical definition. In computing internet protocol security, IPsec is a secure network protocol suite that authenticates and encrypts packets of data to provide secure encrypted communication between two computers over an internet protocol network. Okay, guys, don't look too deep into two computers. It can be server to server, it can be computer to server, or it can actually go ahead and be two computers. Okay, so just keep that in mind. I did talk about the types of VPN, and just remember that there's different hardware, so to speak. Okay, but nonetheless, you can break IPsec down into simple terminology. Layman's terms is securing communication channel, securing data that we are sending over the internet. Okay, and I really like this picture here, guys. Okay, because IPsec is technically an umbrella term, and what is underneath the umbrella? We have AH, ESP, IKE. Okay. And I have this silly little phrase that I came up with. I'll be honest with you, I literally did come up with this. Okay, but nonetheless, always encrypt information. Okay. Always encrypt information. What is IPsec? Always encrypt information. A stands for authentication header. E stands for encapsulating security payload. And I stands for internet key exchange. Okay. So notice here authentication header, encapsulating security payload, and internet key exchange. And we're going to go ahead and get deeper into this, but just think of this. IPsec is composed of three other protocols. Okay. And I do want to go ahead and make this side note here because depending on the source and depending on where you go ahead and do some research, they might say authentication header, encapsulating a security payload, and SA. SA stands for Security Association. So this is just a side note here that some organizations, or so, depending on the source of where you're going ahead and studying IPsec, they might point to SA, which stands for Security Association. The Security Association is extremely similar or is part of Internet Key Exchange, and it's basically going ahead, and we'll talk about it further down, but it's basically going ahead and saying, hey, what algorithms are you going to go ahead and use with regards to establishing the communication? Okay, so just keep that in mind for all intensive purposes. Today, what we're going to focus on is IPsec, and the way we're going to present it is with the authentication header, ESP, encapsulating security protocol, payload, and IKE, internet key exchange. And what are we doing? Always encrypting information. Always encrypt information is going to go ahead and help you remember what protocols IPsec is composed of. So this here is another slide, and stands for authentication header, ESP stands for encapsulating security payload, IKE stands for internet key exchange. Always encrypt information. And on this slide, I basically went ahead and put the same exact information. I just put a different orientation, but repetition is the key. IPsec. What is IPsec? It's always encrypting information. Always encrypt information. A stands for authentication header. E stands for encapsulating security payload. I stands for internet key exchange. Now, let's go on to word of the day. Word of the day, guys. This is part of our new series that we're doing, and we're adding to every single video that we do. We've been doing this, and we're going to continue to do this. That way, we can go ahead and increase our cybersecurity vocabulary, our IT vocabulary, so we can go ahead and have a better understanding and grasp of the information that we talk about and other people talk about, and what words are out there in the industry. And the word today, how fitting. Okay, protocol. And I know this seems kind of silly. I know what you're already thinking. Hey, I already knew what protocol was, but it's always good to take a look at the technical definition. And sometimes people might not even be, hey, I don't even know what a protocol is, or I need a better definition of a protocol, so on and so forth. So let's take a look at the technical definition of a protocol. So a protocol is a set of rules for formatting and processing data. Network protocols are like a common language for computers. The computers within a network may use vastly different software and hardware. However, the use of protocols enables them to communicate with each other regardless. Guys, I've heard this analogy before. This isn't mine, but the best way to think about a protocol when it comes to computers is the language that you speak. Right now, we are speaking English. If I just out of nowhere started speaking Mandarin, you would be like, wait, what is this guy saying? Like, I don't understand. I don't comprehend. No Nintendo. Okay. You would not know exactly what's going on. Okay. Because the way that we're communicating is at a different language. Computers are quite similar. Okay. They need to go ahead and have certain communication channels in a certain format. Okay. And I think that's the best way to look at it, right? If you start speaking Mandarin, but you only speak, somebody else starts speaking Mandarin, but you only speak English, you're just like, hey, I don't comprehend, right? And the computers are going to work the same way. Protocols basically enable computers to standardize communication. Okay, and that's basically what a protocol is. And there's hundreds of protocols out there, but as long as you comprehend that protocol is basically rules and guidelines of how computers are going to go ahead and communicate, then you should have a better grasp of what a protocol is. And as you can see here, we have the technical definition, but nonetheless, let's continue forward. Okay, so now we're going to break down the three protocols that are composed. That compose IPSEC. And the first one here is AH. AH stands for Authentication Header. Okay, remember our little silly phrase, always. Okay, and what is the function of the authentication header? The function is integrity and identification. This here, guys, this slide here, it really doesn't do a lot of justice because there's a lot of things going on in the background, but this slide does do justice with regards to getting a better grasp and at least comprehending exactly what an authentication header does. Okay, one of the one thing that I want you guys to take away from this is, and this might be a trick question, okay, authentication header does not encrypt the payload. I'm going to say that again. The payload is not encrypted by the authentication header. The authentication header is exactly what it sounds like. Okay, this right here, guys, is a packet. Okay, and what a packet is, it's basically bits and pieces of information composed together that's going ahead, and by the end of the day, it just becomes ones and zeros. Okay, but this here, the way it's composed, it becomes and it makes a protocol. Okay, and with the authentication header, you're basically authenticating, okay, you're authenticating what would be the information. In this case, it would be TCP and the payload. You're not encrypting the payload, you're authenticating it. What does authenticating mean? Authenticating is another word for integrity. Integrity is another word for hash. Hash makes sure that whoever sent the information has basically been verified. So this here is one way to verify that the information that you're receiving is authentically the individual or the computer that's sending that information. So for example, if you have Joseph and Joseph is sending a letter, okay, you're gonna go ahead, Joseph is gonna authenticate it. Okay, he's saying, hey, this letter is authentically from Joseph. Okay, and that's basically how the authentication header works. Okay, just think of it like in the old days where kings had a ring and they would go ahead and put their stamp on it, and they were saying, hey, no, this message is legit because it's coming from the king, and here's his authenticated stamp, so to speak. Okay, let's go ahead. Let's take a look at this picture and realize what's going on. This right here, no AHUs, this is what you would see with regards to the header of a packet when there is no authentication going on. You notice you have the IP address, you have TCP, and then you have the payload. Now you have two different modes. Okay, you have two different modes to go ahead and produce the authentication header. You have what is called the transport mode, and you have what is called the tunnel mode. Okay, so the transport mode is actually going to go ahead, and the best way I like to think about this, guys, is transport is no additional header. Okay, no additional header. And I know what you're saying. Hey, there's a an authenticated header here. Okay, but what I mean by that is that you're not adding an additional IP header. Notice here on the tunnel, you have two. You have one and you have two. So technically, the authentication header happens in both because you're on you're using the authentication protocol. But with the tunnel, okay, think of it as almost digging a tunnel. You basically are going to go ahead and create a brand. You're gonna add an additional IP header. Okay. Notice how the tunnel has one IP header, two IP headers. Okay. Something that would be regular that you're not using the protocol at all, you literally just have the IP header. Okay. When it's a transport, you're going ahead and you actually have what would be um, just one IP header. Okay. And with the tunnel, you're actually going to go ahead and authenticate the original IP packet and you're like I mentioned, you're adding that new one. And notice when I gave the question, when I was talking about the interview, I said, "Hey, when you use the tunnel, even though it's more secure, it could be potentially." Keyword potentially problematic when it comes to network address translation because it's saying, hey, you're changing the IP address. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So just know that authentication header has two modes. You have your transport mode and you have your tunnel mode. Tunnel is vastly more secure because you add an additional IP header. Okay, so you have two, as you guys can see, and the original IP header is authenticated. Okay, big picture as well. Payload is not encrypted. So technically, they can go ahead and see your payload, so to speak, if there's a man in the middle. Okay, let's go on to the next one. So the next one, and actually I have an additional slide here. Remember the function, I already mentioned this. We're dealing with integrity. Integrity is another word for hash, and there's different algos. And those algos, depending on which one you would use, goes back to our Internet Key Exchange or also our SA, which stands for Security Association. Okay, so just keep that in mind that there's different algorithms working in the background, just depending on how things are configured. But nonetheless, let's go on to the next one. So ESP, encapsulating security payload, encrypt. Okay, remember, always encrypt information. Encapsulating security payload, guys. This is where not only do you get the integrity function, because the integrity encapsulating security payload also goes ahead and has a part to do with authentication. But more importantly, where ESP stands out, it has to do with confidentiality. So this is where the payload is actually encrypted. Okay, so this is where you go ahead and you would encrypt your payload. So you can see why IPSEC is made of three protocols. Two of the protocols are focusing on authentication. One of them is in focusing on encrypting. So you almost have double the authentication. And this is great to go ahead and avoid replay attacks. So looking at this picture here, you have something similar. Okay, so here on the first slide, or this slide here in particular, you notice that you have the IP packet, and then you have your data. This is something that you would normally see as a normal packet when you're not using encapsulating security payload. Okay, encapsulating security payload also gives you the option to use transport mode or tunnel mode. As you can see here with the transport mode, you're actually going ahead and you're basically doing the same thing. So notice here, you're doing the same thing with the authentication header. Tunnel mode adds an additional IP header. Okay, and in this slide, you can clearly see new IP header, the original IP header. IP header right here, okay, and the IP header here. So this here is an example of a packet that does not use any IPsec at all, or in this case, more specifically, ESP protocol. This packet is an example of going ahead and using ESP, okay, encapsulating security payload at a transport mode. Notice that you have your IP header, which is not authenticated. You have your ESP header, which it is authenticated. You have your data, which here it is encrypted, which is the benefit, huge benefit of ESP. And then you also have your tunnel mode. Remember, with your tunnel mode, it's like digging a tunnel. It's going to be more secure, and you have to go ahead and give you have to exhaust some resources because you're adding a new IP header. But nonetheless, that is the major difference between transport mode and tunnel mode. Okay, and remember, ESP is actually responsible for the encryption of the data, and it also adds authentication. Okay, let's go on to the next one. And the next one, guys, is the Internet Key Exchange. So remember, Internet Key Exchange information. Okay. And I already mentioned it and I'll mention it again. Be mindful of SA, Security Association. Okay. Like I mentioned before, depending on how you learn it, IPSEC might tell you that it is AHESP or IKE. In some cases, I'll tell you it is AHESP or SA. Okay, so just keep that in mind. And remember, with the Internet Key Exchange, okay, the function is rules of communication. This here, Okay. I honestly don't want to do an extreme deep dive on IKE because this there's a lot of algorithms. Okay, I'm gonna show you guys a slide of all the algos that you could potentially use. Okay, but the internet key exchange, the biggest thing I want you to take away from the this particular slide is the DH. Okay, the Diffie-Hellman key exchange. This you could probably make a video on it of itself, but this is showing you how exactly you would go ahead and start to exchange public keys and make secure communications. Okay, and oh, sorry about that. And I had a picture of that. Okay, I pressed the wrong button. But nonetheless, internet key exchange, guys. The internet key exchange, that is basically where the two computers sit down across a table and decide what communication channels or what algorithms they're going to go ahead and use. And just be mindful of the DH. Okay, if you can look up DH key exchange, that's going to go ahead and give you a bigger better picture. And this here is basically what it would be. Notice you have your private key and you have your public key, and you have your public key and you have your private key. And this here, because of the public key and how it's basically gone ahead and exchanged, you can go ahead and have a shared key. Okay, it's basically it's high level math, which you don't necessarily need to go ahead and do the math. You just need to comprehend the basic idea. Okay, you have and we'll just leave it there. Okay, so IKE is just basically thinking about it as two computers sitting down across the table and regarding how and what algorithms they're going to go ahead and use for the communication channel. Okay, and the Diffie-Hellman key exchange is something that you would definitely want to go ahead and look into, and maybe we could make a video on it in the future. But nonetheless, uh, algorithms. Okay, so you can look at these algorithms. All of these algorithms are potential candidates to be used when it comes to IPSEC. I honestly think that this is overkill with regards to going ahead and going through each and every single one of them. I just want you guys to go ahead, at least for myself and at least where I am in my own learning journey right now. I think just knowing, hey, what is a symmetric encryption algorithm? Okay, or hey, what is the key exchange? Or hey, authentication algorithms, getting familiar with them, knowing the major ones. Okay, if you ever have a hard time going to sleep, I recommend you go ahead and start looking into the RFCs, read for comment, and it's probably oh, it cures insomnia. Okay, but nonetheless, just keep in mind that there's a lot of potential symmetric. There's a lot of potential algorithms. Okay, and in this situation, when it comes to IPsec, we are using symmetric encryption algorithms, and when it comes to the authentication algorithms, you guys can see the list here. But nonetheless, guys, just like I said, keep that in mind. And the whole purpose of this video, the whole essence of this video is so you can have a better understanding of IPsec. So if you ever do find yourself in that situation where you're in front of a boss, okay, you can go ahead and give a better answer than the average person that is applying for the same position you are. So you can go ahead and level up and learn and go ahead and make sure that you can go ahead and establish yourself as an authority when it comes to cybersecurity. And that is what we're after, and that is what we're working towards, and that is what we're striving towards. And if you guys haven't joined already, we would love for you guys to join. If you guys have comments, questions, concerns, please feel to go ahead and put them down there in the comments below. But until then, I'll see you guys on the next one.